All right. So since you can see and hear us now, we're going to get started. And thank you all for coming to our first Community Legislative Committee meeting of the new year. My name is Dave Wixon, Chief Operating Officer here at ESBOCES. I'm here also on behalf of Chair of this committee, our board member, our board vice president, Bill Miller, who resides in the Longwood School District. So first thing we'd like to do is do the pledge of allegiance. If you join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation.
Okay.
So for those of you for which this is your first time at a Community Legislative Committee meeting, a brief introduction of kind of what the purpose of this group is. We started a few years ago, probably 6 years ago or so. It was something that Mr. Miller brought over from his home district in Longwood. They've had a long-standing legislative committee. And really what we aim to do here is for each meeting, we invite folks that are involved at different levels of politics, local, up to state, across the board. And the whole purpose is for those folks to come in and kind of talk about politics, elected office, from their perspective, and most importantly, what effect it has on public education. So I'm happy to have tonight Mr. Bob Vecchio. Bob's someone I've known for quite some time, at least my time here at Eastern Suffolk BOCES. Bob currently serves as the Executive Director at the Nassau Suffolk School Boards Association. They serve about 113 boards of education across Nassau and Suffolk counties, as the name would imply. Prior to that, Bob worked for 30 years as a in healthcare accounting for a drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility based in West Hampton Beach. That was Bill. Bob also served many years on the William Floyd School District Board of Education. First elected in 2003, served for 18 years as a trustee, and for 15 out of those 18 years was board president. If you know anything about board service, to be on a board for 18 years and to serve as president for 15 years is quite an accomplishment. Bob spearheaded an effort as co-chairman of the Brookhaven, New York chapter of Our Community Salutes, which is an organization that honors graduating high school seniors who have chosen to enlist in the nation's armed forces. To date, this organization has recognized and honored over 500 enlistees and their families. Bob has been recognized by the New York State School Board Association as a Champion for Change Award and the Everett R. Dyer Award for Distinguished Board Service, which is their highest honor. In addition, he has been recognized by the U.S. Army, state and federal officials, and multiple local community organizations for his leadership and his volunteer work. Bob's also served as a trustee at the St. Jude Roman Catholic Church for 6 years and has been named a member of Town of Brookhaven Board of Ethics Committee since 2016 and is currently serving as the vice chairman of that. Mr. Vecchio currently resides in Shirley with his wife of 35 years, Laura. Together they have 2 children who are married. He's a very proud grandfather, and you know that if you follow him on Facebook. With the arrival of Savannah Rose Vecchio in August 2024. Without further ado, I thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Yours.
Thank you. And my mom would be very proud of that bio. I appreciate that. And, a little lengthy, and my wife would say much longer than it deserves. So thank you for having me here today. And I always look forward to this. I've done this a few times already in the past. And I always look forward to answering questions and having a conversation about service in the arena with advocacy for public education as a priority. I got into school board service because I went into board meetings religiously for about 4 years. And what started me going to a board meeting was reading an article in Newsday about something. And I noticed that my school district was not on the list to receive funding. And I was like, what the heck? Why not? And being a numbers guy, me a lot about the money. So I started going. That's what started me to go to a board meeting. And then I kept going so I could find out what was going on in my home district prior to my kids entering the schools. And then after being in what I called the cheap seats as a resident for 4 years, I decided to throw my hat in and run in 2003. And I was successful in getting elected to the board. And then obviously had the community's trust for 18 years after that. And I had resigned from that position to take on the current role of being executive director for the Nassau-Suffolk School Board Association. We're up to now 114, with Shelter Island just rejoining us, which we're very excited about. And in this new role, it's really great because I took a volunteer passion for 18 years and turned it into a second career where I get to advocate not only for what I did at William Floyd for 18 years and also working with school districts across Long Island, but now I work for service, support, and advocate alongside of 114 boards of education that are members of our association. And we advocate on a state level, federal level, and then there's also advocacy issues that come up on a very local level. So I deal with elected officials from every level, from town, county, state, and federal government. And I always say advocacy is a year-round issue. You have to develop relationships with elected officials regardless of party, and make sure that you work with them to advance your message, advance what you're trying to promote to the better good of, in our case, public education. And I say, you know, we have 408,000 reasons why we need to do that and why we need to do that right. And that's every student that shows up to the doors of public education in Nassau and Suffolk County. I get to work alongside some amazing people, including board members here from East and Suffolk BOCES. One board member is actually the president of our association. There's another board, that's Susan Lippman, and her and Kellyanne Jennings sit on our executive committee, so they're kind of my boss. So I'm gonna be on best behavior tonight, so I don't get dinged in a review or anything. But when you're advocating for kids in public education, it's an easy thing to do, because the cause is right, the cause is just. And, you know, unlike some other things that you may be involved in, there's nothing better than to advocate to give kids the opportunity to change a life trajectory through public education. School district that I was a board member for 18 years, William Floyd, very large system on the South Shore in Suffolk County. We dealt with a lot of poverty. And I saw firsthand how the power of public education could change a life trajectory for the student, but not just the student, their family. And I often think of one student that was a valedictorian in our class who had very humble beginnings, and the family was typical of many families in our community that, you know, struggled day to day. And he rose up to be valedictorian, got a scholarship to an Ivy League school, changed his life forever, and also changed his siblings' lives because they modeled after him and he supported them afterwards. So it took that whole family from struggling right at or above the poverty line and changed their whole trajectory. That's the power of public education. And if you're in for public education to do what's right by kids, that's just one example of why we do it. And every community has millions of stories, whether you're a poor community, a rich community, or an in-between community. The power of public education is so important and such a rewarding thing to have a front row seat to as a board member. Sometimes it gets challenging. You know, sometimes, you know, we often say you don't go to the supermarket and buy a quart of ice cream if you're a board member, because by the time you get out of the supermarket, the ice cream is soup, because everybody wants to grab you here and talk to you about something. So I spend a lot of time advocating for funding and policy initiatives that impact education on a public level. But I also, with this association, provide support and training for board members. What does it mean to be a board member? For a board member, we boil it down to this phrase, David. There's a difference between oversight and overstep. As board members, we oversee these systems. David is the chief operating officer here. His board shouldn't be telling them how to do the day-to-day operations of the job. They should set policy and monitor the finances as fiduciaries. So we train board members about governance, the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, and hopefully you stay on the right path. So it's been great for the 25 years I've been involved, or directly, indirectly involved with advocacy for public education. And in this role, I'm doing this 3 years now. It's been the best decision I made. It was a difficult decision to leave the place I was at for 32 years because I was a very fortunate guy. I loved what I did there, and I love what I do now. So I've been very fortunate that in my professional life, I've done things I've been passionate about and cared about. So we've done a lot of great things as an association as well. We spearhead a lot of efforts. One of the things that's near and dear to me, and David would know this, and Kellyanne and Susan would know this too, is the mental health crisis that we're all dealing with in every zip code across this country, not just Long Island. Those of us that were in the mental health space, and I spent 32 years there on the accounting side, but you learn a thing or two about the other side. We saw this coming before the pandemic. Pandemic certainly made it worse, but there were signs of we were heading in the wrong direction in terms of mental wellness and addiction. And we were seeing people younger and younger struggle and struggling to cope. There's a direct parallel, in my opinion, to the onset of social media and some of the mental wellness issues that we're dealing with. The stigma that still remains around seeking services and seeking treatment always boggles my mind because it's so prevalent. There isn't a family out there that hasn't been impacted by some of these mental health issues or addiction issues, but yet there's still a stigma about it and to talk about it. So one of the things that I take very seriously and I try to work with school systems on is breaking down the silos so that we can have a warm handoff between school systems and community-based providers for mental health and addiction services for our youth and for our families and for our employees too, who struggle. And we're starting to see some progress in that space. But going out there every day and advocating for what's right for public education and what we need in terms of money and resources to sustain what we do here. It's amazing what happens here every day at Eastern Suffolk BOCES among the many campuses that you guys operate. And in some cases, and I'm not afraid to say it, some of the things that you guys are doing are God's work because you are dealing with some of the most challenged students and some of the students that come to you would not get opportunities elsewhere if you didn't provide them here. So we so appreciate what the BOCES does for public education, and then of course the back end support that they provide with school districts on a daily basis. It's never a dull moment. Every day something pops up, even today. There's an issue going on. Maybe folks have heard about regionalization and what it is and what it isn't. And I was interviewed by the news earlier today and just saw what the news clip was. So I was glad I cut my hair earlier this week. My mom, I'm waiting for the critique coming from my mom because she'll always critique whenever she sees me on the news or quote in the paper. But my job is to, fight for the 408,000 kids and the families that send them to our schools to make sure that they're getting the best opportunities available to succeed. And for me, success with a high school diploma comes down to what I call 3 E's. When you get your diploma, if you are ready to enroll in higher education without taking remedial courses, you've succeeded. Or if you're ready to be employed by the trades or an entrepreneur opening up your own business and you have the wherewithal to do that, then we've succeeded. Or if you're eligible to enlist in our nation's military, then we've done our job. Or a combination of one of those 3 E's. Because an interesting fun fact about enlistment into the military, which is why I'm so proud of the organization I co-chair, our community salutes, 70% of today's high school seniors, if they wanted to enlist, can't. Only 30% are eligible to serve, either for a variety of reasons, physical limitations, they can't pass the ASVAB, or mental health or criminal backgrounds, whatever. There's a host of issues, but 7 out of 10 kids, if they wanted to serve, can't. And of the remaining 30%, less than 1% choose to enlist. So that's why it's very special. That's why we honor them every year. And that of all the things I'm involved in, that's one of the most near and dear to my heart, recognizing those kids and recognizing those families. So again, as a system, if we prepared our kids for one of those 3 E's or combo, then we've done our job. And I think that's when we're talking about movement of the graduation standards that's coming down with Portrait of a Graduate, that's what we're getting more towards. With the emphasis on it's not just one pathway, it's multiple pathways. So that's what I'm passionate about. Do it every day, and if passionate about what you do for the young students, find a passion that you love to do and do it for your entire life, and you'll never work a day in your life. Just find something that you're happy about and passionate about and be successful.
So thank you. I'm going to give you a question, but for folks in Zoom land, if you could just use your hand raise option. Paul on the other end of the camera will let us know if you have a question. We'll cut to you ASAP, and folks in the room, if you have a question for Bob, absolutely raise your hand. But question for you. So first a comment. I would say from my perspective, there's nothing more important than a highly functioning school board to the success of the school district. And I say that Anecdotally, in my observations over 8.5 years working with 51 component school districts here at ESBOCES, we can't do it without those boards being highly functioning. So part of the hope here tonight is that for folks that aren't already on the board, we encourage you to at least consider looking into that. But can you talk a little bit about, just in general, the process? So you went to board meetings for 4 years, right? And said, I gotta do this. I gotta get on the board.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, it's really, really easy, actually. You have to be 18 years old and you have to be a resident of your home district. That's it. Those are the only two qualifications. A resident of the home district you want to run for, you're at least 18 years old. That's it. You don't have to have a background in education. You don't have to have any specifics. But then what you have to do is you have to go out, get a petition, and have a certain number of signatures to get your name on the ballot, right? And how many signatures depends on how many people voted in the previous year's election. So it'll vary year to year. But really just you get out, if you're interested, get out involved in your community. People who run who are not known are probably not going to get elected. It's usually the people that are already involved in their community civic organizations or involved with the school PTOs or PTAs or are well known within the community. Because again, your name is going to appear on the ballot. And what I have found that when it comes time to be voted, either for or against, if people don't know who you are, they're not going to trust you with their vote to oversee the kids' education in their community. So make sure you're out there, right? Before running, make sure you're known out there. And before you run, find out what your why is. Why are you running, right? And if your why doesn't start and end with kids, I would say go back and research what you are running for. Because for us, it's all about the kids, first, foremost, and last. If you have other reasons why you're running, you're not running for the right reasons and you're not going to last long. If you think you're running because you are ticked off that the coach didn't give your kid enough playing time and you're going to get on that board and you're going to fire that coach, you're going to be a short-lived board member, and highly functioning boards will not tolerate that. Highly functioning school districts are because of high functioning boards and governance teams, and the opposite is exactly true. You have a dysfunctioning board, you have a dysfunctioning district, and you're negatively impacting your kids, plain and simple. So always strive to be high functioning. So if you want to run for the board, have a passion to make sure you want to see kids succeed. It's really that simple. You don't have to be an expert in finance. You don't have to be an expert in education, but you better be an expert in being sincere and true to the reason why you want to serve. And I will tell you, it is the most frustrating, annoying, tiresome, energy sucking, best thing you will ever do in your life. It was the best thing I ever decided to do and the best experience I ever had.
I was going to say, we're trying to convince people.
Yeah. Well, I start off with the negative and always end with the positive, but realistically, if you're doing it right, you're gonna experience all those things. But at the end of the day, it's still the best thing you do.
Pausing for questions.
Nothing yet. The
Okay.
video keeps going on and off. Working on it.
The other thing I'll say is it's tricky dealing with elected officials when it comes to advocating for educational policy or really education funding. In New York State, it's an interesting setup now. So boards of education are local government units of the state education department. What do I mean by that? So in New York State, you have the governor, you have senators, and you have assembly people, and they're on this side of the house. On the other side is the state education department, separate and apart from the governor, but they're accountable to the legislature, right? They set policy, they set regulations, and boards of education report to the state education department. The commissioner of education has the right, under certain circumstances, to remove school board members or reinstate school board members who may not have been removed properly. And that just recently happened within the last couple of weeks here in Long Island. The state education department has a right to take over a local school district under certain circumstances. That also happened here on Long Island many years ago in a district in Nassau County. So we are local government units of the state education department. What is interesting and different though, is you have the Commissioner of Education, who is the head of the state education department. She, Dr. Betty Rosa, reports to the Board of Regents, and the Board of Regents is like a Board of Education. The Board of Regents are appointed by the Senate and the Assembly, or the legislature. The governor has no authority over the state education department or the Board of Regents. But what the governor does have is the power of the purse. State education department can set all the policies and initiatives that they want, but it's the governor's budget proposal approved by the legislature. But in New York, the governor has a lot of authority over the budget. She can actually push through her budget irregardless of what the legislature wants to do. That's unique in New York. So the power of the purse will actually be your system of check and balance to each other, right? They have the autonomy and the independence of the governor. But again, if you don't have the resources on the other side, that's the check and balance. And that is where us as public education advocates sometimes find frustration, because we're fighting for the dollars to meet the mandates of the regulations and the expectations over here. And if the dollars aren't there, then what do we do, right? So you will always hear board members lamenting the fact that we don't get enough state aid in New York that we're entitled to. And that's true in many cases, and for a long time has always been the case. Fairly recently, the governor fully funded what they call foundation aid, and I'm not going to get too technical into that, but that's the main driver for revenue for school districts. But it's really simple. If we don't get state aid to operate, there's only two other sources of revenue for school districts. The other source is the federal government, which is a much smaller piece for local school budgets, but it's still a source of revenue, comes with a host of mandates. So the revenue never covers what they mandate you to do. And then the third and final source is local property taxes. So if the money doesn't come from the federal government or the state government, there's only one other area school districts can go to bring revenue in, bring money in to fund the budget, to pay for the teachers, to pay for the programs, for the opportunities for our kids. And I often say it's like a parent at Christmas time. You want to get your kids everything they want for Christmas, but you know you're looking at your budget, you have obligations to meet in January. So if you give it to them in December and you don't have the money to meet your obligations in January, you're gonna have a problem. So you have to balance that, right? Same is true with the school budget. We have to balance our budget. We can't overspend. We may want to do a lot of things, but if the resources aren't there, we can't. So we have to meet the obligations, the mandates first, and then see how we can bring in some of the other actions. So it's a really fine balancing act, the finances of school districts and school business. And it gets really frustrating when you hear state officials tell us property taxes are out of control because of the schools. And more cases than not, it's because we're not getting the state funding that we should to support our schools. I'll use my home district, William Floyd, as an example, if that's okay. I sat on that board for 18 years. William Floyd, by the formula, by the foundation aid formula, should have gotten so much money for so long. In the last 2 years, they received an increase in state aid of $44 million, right? We have 9,000 kids. We're heavily relying on state aid. They got $44 million over 2 years, which is a lot of money. But what people fail to understand is William Floyd was owed that money, $44 million, for the last 17 years. My regret of leaving the William Floyd board before that money came in was, oh my God, what we could have done with that money for 18 years. How much less we would need to go to our taxpayers with tax rate increases on their properties if we had that $44 million. And William Floyd did the right thing when they got that money. Not only did they fund what they needed to do, and they put it towards some other initiatives that have long been awaited for and long-range plans, they reduced taxes. They actually reduced taxes by 20%, which was the right thing to do, because that is how true property tax relief can happen if the state finally paid the bill the way they were supposed to. And that's true of every community. And my humble opinion, they're still not paying what they're supposed to. And we're advocating for them because I believe they are still not meeting the state constitutional obligation to provide a sound, basic free education for every school-age child in the state of New York. So part of our fight, part of our advocacy, I want to give a shout out to James Stuccio here at ESBOCES. He's a brilliant business guy, by the way. He's been working with me for almost 2 years now, right, James? Where we've been studying what they currently fund compared to what they're supposed to fund based on the constitutional obligation. And they are woefully short. And you might hear that there's this report going on out there right now to study the formula and how it should be changed. Well, through the work and the effort of James Stuccio and a group of other talented business officials, we laid out a whole game plan of what they should be paying today. Because what they're paying today does not account for the mental health services and supports that every school district is providing to every student in their district today. What they're not paying for is the increase in school safety and security. Every school district has increased security measures of all their campuses. And I tell the story all the time. If in 2004, a year after I got on the board, the superintendent came to me and said, Bob, one of our budget proposals is we're going to fence in every campus, all of our land. We're going to put guard booths at the entrances to our parking lots. And oh, by the way, in addition to increasing security at the high school and the middle school, we're going to put security guards in the elementary schools. My superintendent said that in 2004, I would have said, you're out of your mind. Why did we do that? That's exactly what we did after Sandy Hook. And what I'm getting paid for the state doesn't account for any of those expenses. And third is cybersecurity is a big issue, right? School systems are being attacked. Government agencies are being attacked. We all live in Suffolk County. We know what happened to the county system. My only aggravation with the county system was I couldn't make golf reservations, which is a good thing because I'm a terrible golfer. But schools have invested heavily in technology and infrastructure to ward off cybersecurity, to meet the new technological demands of online testing, and all the other things that we do now with the technology that we have. The technology that we have in this room, right? Schools have invested heavily. We're not being reimbursed properly by the state. So our biggest fight, our biggest advocacy point is advocating for more money to make sure that the kids in this state are getting the sound basic education that they're entitled to by the state constitution. It's not an option. Public education, sound basic education is one of the very few things that are guaranteed in the state constitution. There's a lot of things that this state pays for in their budget. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are not constitutionally guaranteed. Public education is. So just like I have to pay my mortgage first because I made a commitment to the bank to pay off my house in 30 years at a prescribed amount, prescribed rate, before I decide put money for a vacation, I make sure the mortgage is paid first. The state needs to pay for public education first before anything else. They'll disagree with that, but that is the case in my opinion. That's what we fight for every day. You're gonna be afraid to ask me one more question because we'll go on for another 40 minutes.
I got tons of.
What do you feel about that? You're a student. I want to hear your perspective about why public education matters to you.
Well, first it's about the kids, and I feel like a lot of them don't even enjoy coming to school because of like the way it is, the system is. So I don't even sometimes enjoy coming to school, but I know I gotta do what I gotta do to like graduate, and like after life I want to set myself up. So like the stuff that you were saying before with like enrolling in like the army and stuff, like I was looking into stuff like that, and like I don't know. I think that's why it's important.
Yeah, and listen, you have to find your why.
Yeah.
Right, just like I try to find my why to serve as a board member. You have to find your why to why you value that high school diploma at the end of the day.
I didn't even know what this was about at first.
So here's the real question, are you glad you came?
Yeah, I actually,
All right,
I enjoy hearing you talk about like why this is important to me.
it's so important. And listen, I encourage you to look into pursuing enlistment into the nation's armed forces. One of the most distinguished things that you can do, right? I'm not trying to talk you into it, and I don't want your mom or dad or anybody to be mad at me, but it's one of the most important things that you can do. And they've made it very, very attractive financially to try to enlist folks. So if you go that route, make sure you sit down with a financial planner too, so that you're not squandering the bonus money that they'll throw your way. So that's my other piece of advice.
Yep. Go ahead, Paul. All right. Will, go ahead.
So I was just wondering about therapy for kids that don't go to schools like Jefferson Middle School or Oregon, like in public schools. Because from my personal experience before I came to Jefferson Middle School, the therapy like there wasn't good at all. Like I on my IEP it stated I needed a weekly session and it just never happened.
Yep. And it was Wilma, right?
Wilbur Russo, yes.
Wilma. So you're speaking to something very near and dear to me, and you're right. The amount of services that are out there for students that are struggling with mental health, there's not enough services out there in the community to access what you need. And that's a crying shame. And I could probably take up another hour as to why that is the case. But one of the things that we're working on is to develop an infrastructure or develop a system, where community-based mental health providers are able to push into schools and provide the necessary therapeutic services that you need for long-term treatment, right? Schools right now are very good dealing with the crisis intervention services when something happens and somebody acts out or somebody, God forbid, has suicidal ideations. That moment, that crisis moment, there's plenty of things and supports in place to take care of that. But the work to get you back on track for mental wellness is the long-term therapy. And that's where the entire region and not just Long Island or New York, this is true around the country, there's an extreme shortage of credible, dependable services that you can have access to. So in my mind, by getting school districts to partner up with the mental health providers that are out in the community, and there are some that are out there, by creating partnerships so that the accessibility for students to receive that long-term individual treatment or group psychotherapy, whatever the course may be that would be appropriate, we have to do a better job on that. And that's another area where funding to support these services has been severely lacking for decades. I'll speak about the addiction treatment industry. Over 100,000 people a year die of an overdose. 100,000 people a year. So to break it down, that is the equivalent of a jet airliner crashing every day. So I would say to you, if a jet airliner full of passengers crashed and killed people every day, I think the government would turn the system upside down and fix it. The fact that they don't turn the healthcare system upside down and fix this is a personal insult to me because I was in that business for 32 years. And I know the role that the state government and insurance companies have played to decimate the availability of services and the access to services. So until the federal government and the state government get serious about how we invest and treat and support mental health and addiction in this country, we're going to continue to lose generations of people. That's what's happening. Because mental illness, untreated from a young age into early adulthood, leads to suicide, addiction, and for many, death. And I don't say that to scare anybody. I say that because that's what we're dealing with today. And the fact that it is not addressed at the same level that they would shut down the airline industry to make sure that 300 plus people weren't dying every day. Why we don't do this with this boggles my mind. I can't be any more passionate about that. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. You did.
Okay. Just know that we're advocating hard for that too.
Well,
Thank you.
Victoria has a question.
Victoria?
Hi, Victoria.
Not muted.
Maybe she could put it in the.
The other thing I'll say about mental health. Just know this, there's no shame in seeking help. There's only a shame if you don't do anything about it. And for families that are in crisis with a loved one that is struggling and may not be ready for the help themselves, make sure you get help for yourself so that you can be the support for your loved one. Because I will tell you, mental illness and mental wellness and addiction impacts the entire family. So it's not just getting the help for the person struggling, it's getting help for the entire family so that you can help that person on the road to recovery. Family support is so critical to the success of recovery. So I can't stress that either, that if your loved one isn't ready, you get the help so that you can help them when they are.
I asked today, I sent it in the chat, but she hasn't yet.
Okay,
That's the only other news so far.
okay. Steering back in a little bit nuts and bolts of board service. So you mentioned it earlier, the difference between overseeing and overstepping. How does a board member or a board, right? Not just one board member, a board interact with a superintendent and their staff to develop a budget, to make decisions on instructional programs, things of that nature?
Yeah, so, and you said something that's very important. As an individual board member, I have no authority. I have no power. Kelly Ann Jennings, right? Board member here, board member over at Patchogue Medford. As an individual person, she has no authority whatsoever. What she does have is influence, positional influence. It's only when the board is together as a governing body that they have the power and the authority, right? So how does a board interact with their superintendent? Number one, the only person that a board of education supervises, micromanages, and has direct authority over is the superintendent of schools. Nobody else. I don't supervise the principal. I don't supervise the third grade teacher that might be on her phone or whatever. We don't supervise the coaches. We don't supervise the assistant superintendents. We directly supervise the superintendent of schools. That's it. Superintendent bosses are either the 7, 9, or 5 members of a board of education. Toughest job in the world. I don't know how you all do it. Having to answer to 7 people with 7 different priorities, 7 different personalities, leadership styles, and everything else. But a highly functioning board will set clear goals and expectations for the superintendent as to what they want to see. So for me at William Floyd, when I became board president in 2007, our graduation rate was 67%. Unacceptable. But that's what it was. That was our reality. We had just finished major capital projects. So we upgraded our facilities because we had portable classrooms, we had fields that we were second rate. So credit to the board and the superintendent for the vision of getting first rate facilities because our kids deserve nothing better but first rate facilities. So we took care of the outside of the district. Now the work to begin on the inside. So we set a goal for the board in 2007. How do we get from 67% to 90%? And every conversation, every discussion that we had as a board, every decision that we made regarding that budget, how will that move the needle from 67 to 90? If you can't explain to me how that fits into that one very simple goal, get us from 67 to 90%. If you can't have a conversation that aligns with that, then you're wasting our time and we're not interested in talking about it. So what investments, what resources, what tools do we need to give to you, superintendent of schools, to get to that goal? And the superintendents that we had in that period of time, over a long period of time, We're gonna push down Regents courses to the 8th grade. We're gonna start to do academic eligibility to participate in sports. If you're a great athlete, that's great, but you're a student athlete, so you better be doing well academically to have the privilege to play sports. And the end goal around that was to make sure you all graduated on time while excelling on the field, right? Just two little small examples of many things that we did within the entire K through 12 system to move the needle from 67 to 90. I'm proud to say when I resigned in 2021, we did hit 90% that year. But it took from 2007 to 2021 to make it happen. But we were laser focused through our goal setting. That was our long-term goal. And then we had plenty of short-term goals on how to get there. But it all had to align for the drive from 67 to 90. It was the drive to 90 is what I called it, right? And then once they got to 90, I was like, that's great. Now the drive to 95 begins. They were like, Jesus Christ, get out. We're done with you. But a good board working with their superintendent, it's about goals and outcomes. And you're making a decision based on data, not anecdotal stories. Everybody has the anecdotal story, right? Well, I remember when this happened, but you always have the outliers, right? I don't respond to incidents. I respond to patterns. And as a board, we would make our decisions based on data of patterns that we saw, not incidents or spikes. What are the patterns? And I believe that it was that stability, that laser focus, that cohesive, highly functioning board together with two superintendents that took us to get there, that we got from 67 to 90 in a fiscally responsible manner, that the district is still on an unbelievable track of success as well. But it took a lot of hard work. As a board, we just set the policy. We made sure the resources were there. It was the superintendent who made sure they hired the right people, who made sure that the right curriculum was in place, pivoted when something wasn't working. We didn't give the A to Z details on how to get there. We just gave the overall arching goal. Boards get in trouble when they start meddling into the nitty gritty or getting into the weeds. That's not where Board of Education members play. Again, simple goal, 67 to 90. Extremely difficult for the superintendent to do it, but we just stayed focused on the 30,000 foot view goals. And we got there, and kids benefit. And you know what? It was the team, it wasn't the board. I always say a good Board of Education is like a good referee in a football game. If you're making the right calls and you're doing your job, nobody knows your name. You make a lousy call, you're on that ESPN highlight reel forever and they know your name. So I prefer that nobody knew our names and things would just happen. But you had to get a lot of buy-in from staff at the district, but more importantly, you had to get the buy-in from the community to support the budgets every May and to support your vision of what you were doing. So board members, in addition to being public education advocates, being fiduciaries, and overseeing the superintendent, we're marketers. You got to market the return on investment. Because if people don't see the value, why am I investing in it? But people were seeing the value as more and more kids were graduating on time. We started offering more AP courses. We had more kids enrolling in higher education or succeeding in the trades. We brought in career tech ed programs in-house. People saw the value and the community bought it. That answered the question.
I think you did.
I think so. I hope so.
So I have Victoria put a question into the chat. So she was, I think, falling in right behind Wilbur earlier. So what about if the kid is not acting out and looks perfect on the outside? Does that mean that this kid should get less therapy time or attention than the kid that is acting out?
No, absolutely not. Because you know what? A lot of folks suffer in silence. And you don't know there's something going on. That's wrong. So there are a couple things that are innovative and new to school systems where, which quite frankly, being involved in the mental health space for 32 years, I was familiar with it. But now that I start hearing it in public education, public schools, mind blowing. And I'm so excited that staff are being trained in mental health first aid. Staff are being trained, professional staff are being trained in trauma-informed practices so that we can be sensitive to when somebody is struggling. Because even those that act out might be a sign of somebody struggling, not 100%. There are indications that you could look for when people are struggling in silence. And you won't know it unless you're trained on what to look for, right? But there are always some indications that kids who are really struggling and most struggle in silence, because I mentioned earlier the stigma. Most will struggle in silence, and it's harder to detect. But as time moves on, there are certain things that are telltales, folks. So you have to be trained in what to look for, but most importantly, not always just make the connection that one has to do with the other, right? But if you're trauma informed or you have that awareness, maybe you could stave off something before it gets more serious. Very exciting thing, and it kind of ties into this, but it doesn't. Very exciting thing that we are working on, that we have advocated for a long time, and it's going to be happening shortly out in Hampton Bays, actually. There's a program called Handle with Care. And what Handle with Care is if law enforcement responds to a house on a call, and let's say it's an overdose death in the house of a young person. They happen to notice school-age children in the house. This system would allow the law enforcement agency to send a notification to the school district saying, 123 Main Street, Handle with Care. That's all the information that's shared. No details, no names, no violation of confidentiality. And you know this, school districts, they get the notification, they punch into the computer 123 Main Street. Here are the kids that are registered in our schools to that address, what grades they're in, et cetera, et cetera. So now school is aware, maybe you tip off the teachers saying, okay, Joanne, in your class, we got a Handle with Care notification, just heads up. So that if they do act out, we're not re-traumatizing the student saying, hey, knock it off, go down to principal. Now it could be, hey, Joanne, why don't you come and talk to me? Or if you notice something a little different, you quietly pull them aside, and now you have an awareness. Seems like a real simple thing, right? Kind of a common sense thing, just to have that awareness. So before it manifests itself into something uglier, the school has a heads up. And then if it's a real serious or significant event, the Handle with Care also has a methodology saying handle with care like a code red, meaning something really bad happened, you need to have your support team in place for when the child does come into the building, or you're making the outreach even before school starts. Let's say something happened really bad on a Friday night, the school is mobilizing and trying to support the student and the family even before they get to school on a Monday. It happens now informally. I know as a board member, I would always tip off my superintendent to something that happened in the community that I either saw on social media or a fire department buddy of mine said a house burnt down, families displaced, blah, blah, blah. I would always say, hey, heads up, so-and-so, their mother died, just heads up. Happens informally now. This just kind of formalizes it because it's our first responders in the community that oftentimes are responding to something that school districts wouldn't even be aware of. We're also going to have a conversation with the Suffolk County Sheriff. Because when you think about traumatic events, right? If you're being evicted from a house, who's doing the eviction? Suffolk County Sheriff is taking the stuff outside, right? They know about it ahead of time. So what a great thing for the Sheriff's Department to be able to sit there and say, hey, 123 Main Street, Handle with Care. Coming from the sheriff, we know it's going to be one of two things. Now you might be there in support of, for a family that may now become homeless, and you could put things in place to make sure that you're giving the supports to that family and that child to minimize whatever traumatic impact that may have. That's what we're working on, and should be rolling out soon in one school district after the holidays, and we hope to have it in the town of Southampton townwide later on. And there's still conversations and logistics, so nothing is cemented in stone. But in the state of New Jersey, this is a mandated thing that the Attorney General for the state of New Jersey mandated it for every law enforcement agency in New Jersey. It's been happening in Maryland for many years, Virginia. So it's not a new program, but it's time. It's time that we're bringing it in.
Thank you. Any final question? Go ahead.
There's one more question from Jada. This is gonna be a tough one. I have a question about the blind situation with kids who struggle with blindness, and we have staff who don't know how to properly help the kids who need it. What about teaching them Braille, or even getting people who know how to help?
That's a great question, Jada, and you know, this gets back to customer service as a board member. I would call customer service. If you're aware of something that somebody is passionate about that they think should be brought into a school district, you know, what I would suggest is first, go to the building administration and say, hey, what about this? Maybe we should do this program. We have a need for this, or we should have an awareness about this. Bring it to the building administration. Because I've always found, you know, you start off with the building administration, you work it up to the level. It shouldn't come from the board top down first. But as a customer service agent, I would say to my superintendent, hey, Jada asked me about this. Can you look into it? And then get back to the board about what we would need if we want to go that route. So advocacy is what you need to do. Just like I advocate for education funding and education policy. This is an educational program that you're passionate about. Excuse me, advocate to the building administration. This is something you'd like to see brought in and let them weigh it out. Because again, getting back to that budgetary issue, you have to weigh out the priorities versus the wants, right? You have to weigh out, you have to provide the mandates and then see what's left over for the wants. So have the conversation with the building administration, why it matters and the benefit from the program, you know? I think you will find most educators are always receptive to comes down to a basic premise, and I'm sure you share it. If it's good for kids, it's good with me. How do I provide it and make sure it's sustainable is the big question. But nothing's off the table for a conversation and exploring what can happen. There may be grant opportunities to support programs and initiatives like that as well. So that's my advice. Be the advocate.
Any final questions? That's it. Well, Bob, we really appreciate you being here. We have a very small token of abbreviation in the form of a swag bag.
I love swag bags.
Certificates of appreciation.
Wow. I love swag bags and I love this. Lighthouse is my
Stress
favorite.
lighthouse.
Love that. Absolutely. Little stress lighthouse. The last couple of days I could have used this. But I appreciate all your time and attention. And just know that I and my association will always here as a resource. Because again, like I said in the very beginning, we got 408,000 reasons why we got to get it right every day. And we're going to fight hard every day to do just that.
Here, here. Folks, our next meeting will be January 16th. There's a little bit different if you saw the posting that was sent out, but there was a meeting scheduled for December 5th, but we kind of figured it was a little bit too close of a turnaround. So once we secure the presenter for that, we'll send out that information. But please mark your calendars to join us either in person or virtually. We really do appreciate you being here. Especially our students, we do this for you, and we're glad you could be here to hear this. And we appreciate you making the time out of your busy schedule to be here. So thank you all. Be safe. Have a great weekend. Have a great holiday season if I don't see you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, let's get it.
That's why I said, get that information.